Hello and welcome to Bite My Pie. A sad reality of the modern world is that we need to protect our possessions. Sure, you could set about turning your property into the home equivalent of Fort Knox, complete with wrought iron fencing and padlocked gates, but perhaps a less intrusive option is CCTV. Of course, there are many commercial options available, but what if you could build your own using free and open source software? In this video we'll be doing precisely that, setting up the impressive ZoneMinder. Then we'll attach and configure 4 different types of camera to see how it all performs. So if this sounds of interest to you, stick around. ZoneMinder is software that turns a computer into a video surveillance system, so you'll need something to install it on. I'll be using a micro PC with an Intel processor and 4GB of RAM, and will be installing ZoneMinder onto its 120GB solid state drive. Be aware that video footage can take up a lot of space. If you plan on capturing lots of 1080p feeds from multiple cameras, you may want to opt for more storage. When it comes to setting up ZoneMinder, there are several routes you could go. The path we'll be taking in this video uses a system called TurnKey Linux. This will enable us to set things up both quickly and easily. While I'll be installing it onto the physical hardware, you could do this inside a virtual machine. Right, let's hop over onto a computer and then we can get started. Here I am on a Windows 10 computer, but you could also use a Mac or Linux. I'm going to open a web browser and search for TurnKey Linux. It's this website we want, turnkeylinux.org. From the home page we're going to use the search box to look for ZoneMinder, and there it is in the search results. Have a look for the newest version, which at the time of this recording is 16.0, and we're going to download the ISO file. I'll save that to my downloads directory. If you're not familiar with TurnKey Linux, it offers a range of pre-packaged system images it calls appliances. These include web servers, databases, file servers and much more. Each is based on the rock-solid Debian Linux distribution. Basically, if the software you're looking for is available, it's a great way to get it up and running with the minimal amount of head scratching. Next, we need a program to copy this to a USB stick. So let's search for Etcher and pay its website a visit. I'm going to grab the portable version for Windows. Select the appropriate option for your operating system, and then I'm going to save that to my downloads directory as well. Okay, when you've got both of those you can close the web browser and then go find the downloads. I'm going to connect a USB stick to my computer and then double click on Etcher to open it. Depending on the version of Etcher you downloaded, you may need to install it first. But when you reach this screen, click Flash from File, navigate to the Downloads folder and select TurnKey ZoneMinder, then go to Select Target. Your USB stick should be listed, so tick it and click Select, and then click on Flash. Choose Yes to make Windows happy, then we'll watch as Etcher copies the TurnKey appliance to the USB thumb drive at super speed. Once it's finished, you can close the program and remove the USB stick from your computer. Okay, it's time to install TurnKey Linux's ZoneMinder appliance, but in order to do so we need to make sure that our computer can boot from a USB stick. Connect your USB stick to the computer you want to install it onto, and then power it on. Keep tapping the relevant key on your keyboard until the boot menu appears. On mine it's F7, but it does vary from model to model. And unfortunately not all computers have boot menus, in which case you'll need to enter the UEFI or BIOS. If you have a boot menu, once it opens you're looking for the entry for the USB stick. If it's listed, great, use the cursor keys on your keyboard to highlight it and press enter. If on the other hand, like mine, it's nowhere to be seen, you'll also need to enter the UEFI setup. Depending on your computer you may be able to use your mouse to navigate the menu. Or if your screen looks similar to mine, you'll have to use the cursor keys instead. The first thing we need to do is find Secure Boot. This is a system that Microsoft requires manufacturers to enable in order to put a Windows sticker on their PCs. But for our purposes here we need to turn it off. So press Enter to select it, and then make sure that it's disabled. I'm going to press the escape key to back out of that screen. We still need to make some further changes in here, but after disabling secure boot I recommend saving the changes and restarting. So let's do that now. Enter back into your computer's setup utility. If your PC has the more modern UEFI rather than the traditional BIOS, you need to locate a setting called CSM or Compatibility Support Module. This may simply be referred to as Legacy Mode. Either way, ensure that it's turned on. I'm also going to change the boot option filter to Legacy Only. TurnKey Linux doesn't seem to like UEFI. Then if we go to the boot section, make sure that Fast Boot is disabled. This is another feature primarily designed for Windows. And then I'm going to change the boot mode to Legacy here as well. Now if your computer doesn't have a boot menu, you can change the boot order to make the USB stick boot first. If you do this, it's a good idea to come back in here after the installation is complete and change it back to the internal drive. Some setup utilities will allow you to choose a one-time boot option, in which case you could select the USB stick. But as my computer has a boot menu, I'm going to come out of there, then save changes and reset. Okay, hopefully after all that your USB stick is now showing up in the boot menu, so let's select it and carry on. Here you have the option to try it without installing, but if you're happy to jump right in, press enter on install to hard disk. Next we need to decide what we want to do with the disk we're going to put the operating system onto. If you have a use for LVM or logical volume management, you could leave it on use entire disk and set up LVM, but I'm going to go with guided use entire disk. Then we need to select the disk we want to install TurnKey Linux onto. My computer has two internal disks, an eMMC or embedded multimedia card and an SSD or solid state drive. Your computer will most likely only have a single drive, so press enter to select it. I'm going with the SSD as it has both more storage space and is faster as well. With that set, I'm going to leave it on finish partitioning and write changes to disk and press enter. And then I just need to confirm it. It wants to install the bootloader for the new operating system. If your computer only has a single internal drive, you can select yes here. If on the other hand, like mine, your PC has more than one, choose no instead. Then you want to select the same drive you previously put the operating system on to install the bootloader as well. That's the installation complete, so let's select eject live medium. Then as it tells us, we can remove the USB stick and press enter to continue, and then reboot the system. On the first boot we need to set up some accounts. This one is the root account, which is the administrator for the operating system. So type in a password and press enter, then confirm it and press enter again. Next we need to enter a password for the AdMiner account. ZoneMinder uses a MySQL database, and this is the account for that. So again, enter a password and then confirm it. Then lastly we need to enter a password for the ZoneMinder admin account. So pop one in and then confirm that as well. TurnKey Linux offers a backup and migration service. We'll look at backing up ZoneMinder later in the video. For now, use the tab key on your keyboard to highlight skip and then press enter. Here you have the option to receive TurnKey Linux system notifications by email, or instead you can select skip. As it tells us, the system's configured to automatically install security updates every day. So let's select install to make sure it's up to date right now. Right, let's reboot as suggested. After the restart, if your screen looks like this, just press the enter key. And the first thing I'm going to do is log into the root account and then launch the configuration menu by typing conf console. Before we take a closer look at what's going on here, I want to set up a static IP address on this ZoneMinder appliance. To do that, I'm going to enter into the advanced menu, and you can see that there are several things we can configure in here, as well as being able to reboot or shut down the system. We could also quit this configuration console to return to the terminal. But all I want to do is configure networking, At the moment it's set on DHCP, which is why I want to change it. Since you'll be accessing ZoneMinder through a web browser, you don't want its IP address changing, so we're going to alter that to static. Now if you prefer, you could reserve an IP address on your router, in which case cancel out of this and leave it on DHCP. But if you're happy to do it this way, enter a suitable IP address. The net mask and default gateway should be fine as they are. I'm going to leave the name server on Google's 8.8.8.8 and then enter Google's other public DNS server in the second name server box. If I tap the tab key, I can press enter on apply. You should now see your new settings on the screen. I'm going to back out of there and do a restart to make sure they're applied. And yes, I do want to do that. Once it's rebooted, log back in as root. If you'd sooner fix ZoneMinder's IP address on your router, you may need its MAC address to do so. You can get this by typing IP space A and pressing enter. And there it is on the screen. Okay, now that we've dealt with ZoneMinder's IP address, let's relaunch the configuration console. We saw this listing before, but each item should now be showing ZoneMinder's new IP address. On the screen we have several services listed. These are all available to us, even with encrypted versions, because we're using a TurnKey Linux appliance. We can enter the ZoneMinder, Web Shell or Webmin addresses into a web browser to go directly to those options. But it gets even easier than that, because if you visit the web menu or TurnKey ZoneMinder control panel, as it's also known in this appliance, you can choose from there which one you want to use. We also have SSH and SFTP set up for us on port 22 and ready to go. So make a note of the addresses on your computer and then we'll exit out of this menu. And we can do that by heading into the advanced menu and going down to quit. And yes, I really do want to do that. You can see at the bottom of the screen that we're still logged in as root to the terminal. So type exit and press enter to log out of there. Right, if we head over to another computer, we'll see how this works. Back on my Windows 10 PC, I'm going to open a web browser and enter https:// followed by the IP address of my TurnKey Linux ZoneMinder appliance. You'll get a security warning from your web browser. This is because the encrypted connection is using a self-signed certificate. But since it's a local connection and we set it up, that's fine. So click on Advanced and then choose Continue to the IP address. And here we have the TurnKey ZoneMinder control panel. And this is what I meant earlier about being able to access these various options from a single place. Sure, you could type in their addresses individually to go directly to them, but from this control panel you can simply select the one that you want. Before we dive into ZoneMinder, let's first take a quick look at the other two services. So if I click on Web Shell, this is exactly what it says it is. In other words, the shell, or terminal as it's also known, accessible in a web browser. And we can log in here as though we're still sitting in front of the computer with ZoneMinder installed on it, and carry out tasks that you might otherwise have to do directly on that PC. So hopefully even with this brief session you can see how useful this could be. For example, if you wanted to restart or shut down your ZoneMinder PC remotely. Okay, let's quit out of there and then log out of the terminal. You can return to the web menu by clicking the browser's back button. Now let's have a quick look in Webmin. Again, we use our root account to log into this one. If you're not familiar with Webmin, essentially it's a web interface designed to aid users in carrying out admin tasks on a Unix-like, in this case Linux-based operating system. In other words, it provides a more friendly interface for running system commands, especially for those not overly fond of the Linux terminal. We won't be doing anything in here, as TurnKey Linux has done the bulk of the work for us. So let's head for the exit and log out of there. And I'm going to return to the web menu by clicking the back button twice. Or maybe 3 times. Note also on this page there's a couple of hyperlinks. The top one will take you to ZoneMinder's website, and clicking the bottom one would take you to the TurnKey Linux GitHub repository for their ZoneMinder appliance. Right, drum roll please. The time has now come to launch ZoneMinder. To log into this one we need the ZoneMinder admin account that we set up earlier. If you scroll to the bottom of the page, decide whether you want to send ZoneMinder any data or not. I'm going to leave it on decline and then click apply. And here we have ZoneMinder's web interface. As you can see, at the moment there's not a lot going on in here, so let's start adding some cameras, shall we? I've connected a USB webcam to the ZoneMinder PC. It's actually an old Xbox 360 camera. To add any type of camera to ZoneMinder, we need to make sure that console is selected from the menu at the top of the screen. From there, click on Add. Start on the General tab and give the camera a name. I'm going to call it Xbox. We need to select the source type. As this camera is connected directly to the ZoneMinder appliance, set this to local. Function is the type of monitoring you want the camera to perform. There's only 3 options in here you really need to be aware of. Monitor will set the camera to simply show its live feed. MoDECT, short for motion detect, does what it says on the tin. That is to provide live footage but also record any events where motion is detected. And record simply constantly records whatever the camera is showing. I'm going to set this camera to monitor. Make sure that enabled is ticked and then click onto the source tab. With this being a locally connected camera, we need to set the device path. And to find this, we need to have a look in the terminal. So open a new browser window and enter the IP address of your ZoneMinder appliance. We're going to click on Web Shell and log in to the terminal. I'm going to clear the screen and then enter the command ls/dev/video**. This shows us the path of any locally connected video devices. Although as you can see 2 paths are listed, these actually both belong to the same USB webcam. That's because video devices usually have a feed for capturing their video and another for metadata, so we need to find out which one's which. To do that, we're going to install a package called v4l-utils. I'm going to press enter to continue. Right, let's clear the screen again, and if I issue the command v4l2-ctl space --info space --device space and then the first video path that it listed earlier, which for me is /dev/video0. If I press enter, you can see that it's my USB video camera, but the important part we're looking for is here underneath device caps, which in this case says video capture, and that's precisely what we're looking for. By contrast, this is the entry for /dev/video1. This time device caps says metadata capture, which isn't the one we want. So I'm going to jot down /dev/video0 and exit out of there. Okay, back in ZoneMinder, we need to enter the path for the video capture feed into the device path box, which for my Xbox webcam is /dev/video0. The capture method needs to be set on video for Linux version 2. The device format depends where in the world you're located. Here in the UK I can leave that on PAL. If you're in the US you'd need NTSC. I'd leave target colour space on 32-bit colour, and then we need to set the capture resolution. It's probably a good idea to start low and then increase it once you know it's working. For that reason I'm going to start on 320 by 240, and depending on how your camera's mounted you may want to change the orientation. For a USB webcam the other tabs should be okay on their default settings. So when you're ready to add your first camera, click on Save. The monitor status will usually change on its own from not running to capturing eventually, but if you want to speed this process up, click on the name of the camera. And here we have the video feed from the Xbox webcam. It's a bit small at the minute, that's because I set it on a low resolution. I could change the scale from actual to scale to fit to see it a bit better. I can even click on the video to zoom in, and then either hold down the control key and click, or click the button below the screen to zoom back out. None of that will improve the resolution though, so to do that click on console, then you can either select the camera and click on edit, or a quicker way to get to these same settings is click on the link beneath source, and then let's return to the source tab. So now that I know this camera's working, I'm going to increase the capture resolution. And I happen to know that this particular Xbox webcam only supports up to 640 by 480 pixels, so let's set it to that. and then click on Save. Right, let's select the camera again and see what difference that's made. Even though it's an old camera, you can still see that that's made things better. By the way, if you wanted to, you can pause the live feed and then return to it when you're ready. Okay, let's return to the console. Now that we've added a local USB camera, we'll look at how to add an IP camera next. An IP, or Internet Protocol camera, is a video camera that sends its feed over a network. There are many models available. I'll be using an inexpensive TP-Link Tapo. If you're looking to purchase an IP camera, make sure that it supports RTSP, or the real-time streaming protocol, as that's what we'll be using to connect it to ZoneMinder. Right, let's get started. Here I am on an Android tablet, though this could equally be a smartphone, as typically you'll need to install an app for the IP camera to set it up. While this process will vary from model to model, you're basically looking for a way to enable RTSP in the camera's settings. I'm going to open the Play Store and search for Tapo, and then I'm going to install the TP-Link app. With that done, I'm going to select Open and then agree to the terms of use. If you're using a Tapo, you'll need to sign up for a TP-Link account, then enter your credentials and log in. I don't want voice control, and I still don't want it. And now I'm going to add my device. I've got a Tapo C100, so I'm going to plug the camera in and follow the on-screen instructions. Okay, that's been over 30 seconds, so let's choose Next. I'm going to enable location to help with the connection and select Allow. Looks like I need to pop into the settings to turn it on there as well. Let's go back to the app and then I'll select Next again. Great, so it's found the camera. Then I just need to enter the key for my wireless network and select Next and confirm that I want it to connect to that network.
Connecting to Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi connected.
Next, I need to give my camera a name. I'm just going to call it Tapo and then continue. Then I need to set the camera's location, so let's say I'm going to put this one in the kitchen. And that's the camera set up and ready to use with the app. The TP-Link Tapo cameras can record locally to a micro SD card, but since we'll be adding the IP camera to ZoneMinder, we don't need to do this. Right, let's select the camera. And to turn on RTSP, I need to dive into the settings. Then head into Advanced Settings, and then into Camera Account. In here you create a username and password, and then save the account. While you're in your camera app settings, you want to find the section that lists its MAC address. Make a note of this as you may need it to reserve the camera's IP address. Right, that's it in the Tapo app, so let's come out of there and then return to ZoneMinder. I'm back on my Windows 10 computer logged into ZoneMinder, but before we add the IP camera we need to make sure that its IP address isn't going to change. So to do that, let's open a new tab in the web browser and enter the IP address of my router. If you don't know what this is, you can find it by opening the command prompt and entering ipconfig. Typically your router's IP address is the same as your default gateway, and you can see that that's the case here. So log into your router and find the section for reserving IP addresses. Let's set up a new one with the IP address 192.168.0.99. Then enter the MAC address of the IP camera. I'm going to give it the name Tapo and add the entry, then click on OK to save it. With that done, I can log out of my router and close the browser tab. For the changes to take effect on your IP camera, you want to power it off and then on again. So give it a minute or two to start back up and then we'll test if it's working. To do that, I'm going to open VLC Media Player. If you don't already have this, you can download it and install it for free from the website listed in the video description. Once you've got it up and running, head for Media and open Network Stream. Then you need to type in the RTSP address for your IP camera. I found the relevant information for Tapo cameras on TP-Link's support site. You'll need to find the RTSP address format for your camera. For the Tapo, it's RTSP:// // the username you set up in the camera app, a colon, followed by the password you created in the camera app. Then you need to enter the @ symbol, the IP address you reserved on your router for your IP camera, which in my case is 192.168.0.99. Then we have another colon, this time followed by the port number of 554, a /, and then either stream 1 or stream 2. On a Tapo camera, stream 1 will access 1080p or full HD video, whereas stream 2 is for the much lower 360p resolution. As with the USB camera, I'd suggest trying the lower resolution first, and then if that works, bumping it up later. So let's see what happens if I click on play. Great, we've got connectivity and there's the kitchen again. So let's stop that. And since that's working, I'll try the higher quality stream. Let's change that to stream 1 and hit the play button once more. And there we have a much bigger image, so much so that I'll have to resize it to fit the screen. Okay, let's stop that. And if we return to ZoneMinder, we're now ready to add our IP camera. So let's click on Add. And on the General tab, give the camera a name. I'm going to go with Tapo. Make sure that the source type is set to FFmpeg. And for the function this time I'm going to go with MoDect or Motion Detect. Naturally you're going to want the camera to be enabled. And then take a look at the reference image blend percentage. As I understand it, this is basically the blend of captured still images added together to help fine-tune the sensitivity and aid with motion detection. The main two settings you want to take note of is the default indoor and the outdoor one below it. So set this depending on where you've got your camera located, either inside or outside of the house. On the Source tab, we need to enter the source path. This is the same RTSP address that we used in VLC Media Player. Once again I'm going to start with the lower quality stream, and then if everything works okay I'll come back and increase that later. If your camera supports it, I'd leave the method on TCP. Likewise, ideally you want to leave the target colour space on 32-bit colour. Since I know that my camera's lower resolution stream is 360p, I'm going to enter that resolution in here, which is 480 by 360. Change the image's orientation if needed. Most of the other tabs can be left alone. However, depending on your camera, you may want to look at control. As mine's just a basic model, it doesn't have this functionality, but if you have a PTZ or pan tilt zoom camera, you may be able to control it through ZoneMinder. The first thing you'd need to do is see if your camera model is supported. If you click on the drop down box, you can see a list of the cameras that ZoneMinder supports out of the box. If your model isn't listed, don't despair. By clicking on Edit and scrolling to the bottom of the window that opens, you can add a new control. Note though, this is not a trivial task by any stretch of the imagination. After naming your camera and selecting its type of connection, and ticking the boxes of the options that it supports, you then have to create a control script. Existing scripts live in the ZoneMinder control directory, so rather than starting from scratch you could try modifying one of these, but doing so is beyond the scope of this video. If you have one of the cameras listed, once selected, don't forget to tick the controllable box to activate this functionality. You'll also need to fill in the control device, which apparently is the username and password to access the camera's feed, and the control address, which is the camera's IP address and port number. Then remember to click Save. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to test this as I don't have any PTZ cameras, so I'm just going to return to the Source tab and save my changes. Great, that's the second camera added. Let's click on its name and see if it's working. Marvellous. Now that we know that works, let's return to the console. Click on the source to edit it. So I'm going to alter that to stream 1, and because this is a 1080p stream, I'm going to change the capture resolution. But I'm not going to actually change it to 1080p. The reason being is that it's best to find a compromise between video quality and file size. This would be particularly important if you had several cameras connected that were all constantly recording. Higher resolutions also place a greater load on the system. So for this camera I'm going to go with 720p and then click Save. Okay, let's take a look at that now. And straight away you can see that the actual image is larger, so I'm going to scale that to fit. If you recall, I set this camera up to record when it detects motion. I'm going to wiggle an object in front of the camera to hopefully trigger a recording. That seems to have done the trick, so if I scroll down a bit you can see the captured event at the bottom. I'm going to click on that. And now we have the recording automatically being played back. Let's close out of that and return to the console. 2 cameras down, 2 to go. Next up we're going to turn a Raspberry Pi into an IP camera. I've chosen the Pi Zero as it uses less power and is more cost effective. But you could do this on a standard Raspberry Pi if you prefer. You'll also need a Raspberry Pi camera. These are available with 2 different types of cables, depending on whether you're using a Pi Zero or a standard Pi, so make sure you've got the right one. Okay, let's begin. On my Windows 10 PC, I'm going to open the web browser and search for Raspberry Pi. Then head over to raspberrypi.org and click on Software. Scroll down the page to the Raspberry Pi Imager, and I'm going to download that for Windows and save it to my downloads directory. Once you've got that, you can close the browser and let's open up File Explorer. Then we should have the software in our downloads folder. Double click on it to install. Select Yes to continue and then click on Install. Once it's ready you can click Finish to run the program. If you haven't already, you need to connect your micro SD card to your computer, and then we're going to choose the operating system. We need to click on Raspberry Pi OS Other, and then we want Raspberry Pi OS Lite. Select Choose SD card and then click on yours. And now we're ready to write the operating system to the micro SD card. So when you're happy to do so, click on Yes. When that's finished, you can click on Continue, remove the micro SD card from your computer and close the program. To save us having to connect a monitor, keyboard and mouse to our Raspberry Pi, we're going to configure it to automatically connect to our wireless network and then turn on remote access so that we can log into it from another PC. So to do this, reconnect your micro SD card to your computer. If it comes up with this boot warning message, just ignore it. The only problem is that Windows doesn't know what to do with the Linux file system on the micro SD card, which isn't a problem at all. To configure the Wi-Fi, we're going to add a file to the micro SD card, and to save a bit of typing we can copy and paste some text. I'm going to reopen the web browser and head over to some documentation on the official Raspberry Pi website. I've put a link to this web page in the video description, and if we scroll down the page there's an example of a wpa_supplicant.conf file, which it just so happens is the very file we need to create. So let's click and drag over the sampled text to highlight it, then right click on it and copy, then go down to the search box and type Notepad and click on it to open the text editor. Then if I right click in there I can choose Paste. While that's saved us having to type the whole thing in, we still need to make a few changes. Click at the end of the country line and delete everything after the equals sign. You need to enter your 2-letter country code, which for me is GB. Next, on the SSID line, delete everything inside the quotes. Here you need to enter the name of your wireless network. Then lastly, on the PSK line, delete everything inside the quotes again, and this time enter your wireless key. With the changes complete, we need to click on File and choose Save As. Then you should see a boot drive that's on your micro SD card. Select that. We're going to call it wpa_supplicant.conf. You need to change Save As Type from text documents to all files, and then click on Save. With that done, you can close Notepad and close the web browser. That's the Pi's Wi-Fi configured. Now let's turn on remote access. To do this, we're going to open File Explorer, select the micro SD card boot drive, right click in the white space and create a new text document. Give it the name SSH and press enter. At the moment that's a text file, which is not what we want. But if we click on View and tick File Name Extensions, we can rename the file and then delete the .txt. And yes, I do want to change it. You can see now that it's just a file, which is exactly what we want. So let's return to view and untick file name extensions. So now we should have the two files that we created in here, the empty SSH and the wpa_supplicant.conf. And with that done, let's close File Explorer and we're ready to go. You need to remove the micro SD card from your computer and pop it in your Raspberry Pi. If you haven't done so already, I'd also connect the Raspberry Pi camera to the Pi. Check with the images on screen to ensure you've got the ends of the ribbon cable with its exposed pins connected the right way around relative to the circuit boards. Then connect your Pi's power supply and turn it on. While you give it a minute or two to start up, return to your computer, because the next thing we need to do is find the Pi's IP address. There are several ways to do this. I'll go through just a couple. So the first one, if we open the web browser and enter the IP address of your router, and you're looking for a list of the devices that are connected to it. In this router's interface, it's nice and easy to find them here, and if I click on that, I get some information about those devices. And this is what I want right here, my Raspberry Pi's IP address. So I'll make a note of that and log out. Now if you couldn't find your Pi's IP address, we can use a nifty bit of software to obtain it. This is called Angry IP Scanner, and you can find it at angryip.org. Let's click on download. Now you could download the installer, but I'm just going to grab the executable for 64-bit Windows and save that to my downloads directory. Right, let's go find it. And I can run it from there. This program requires Java, so we can download it here. I'm going to leave the latest LTS or long-term support release, which is currently OpenJDK 11, selected and click latest release, and then save that to my downloads directory as well. If I return to File Explorer, let's install this open source version of Java by running through the wizard. Accept the license terms. I'm going to install it to the default program files directory and then click install. And yes, I do want to do that. That was fairly painless. And now we should be able to run Angry IP Scanner. I don't want to send error reports, and I'm going to close out of there. It's automatically detected my IP range, so let's see what happens if I click on Start. If you get a message from the Windows firewall about OpenJDK, check that private networks is ticked but not public networks, and then click Allow Access. Right, let's see what the Angry IP Scanner found. Scroll down the list looking in the host name column, and what do you know, there it is, the Raspberry Pi, and more importantly its IP address. So jot that down and then you can close the program. Now that we know the IP address of our Pi, it's time to remotely log into it. To do that on Windows 10, we first need to make sure that the OpenSSH client is installed. So head into Settings and then into Apps. Click on Optional Features and check if you can see it in the list. If it's not there, we need to add a feature, and then scroll down to find it. It's the OpenSSH client we want, not the server, so select it from the list and then click on Install. Once the list refreshes, it should now be installed, and if we click on the back arrow at the top of the screen, you should now see it in the list. With that done, I'm going to close out of there and type cmd in the search box to open the command prompt. Right, let's enter the command ssh space pi at, and then the IP address of the Raspberry Pi, which in my case is 192.168.0.50. Press enter to start the connection, and as this is our first time connecting, we need to type yes and press enter again to accept the Raspberry Pi's fingerprint. Then type the password of lowercase raspberry and press enter once more. And that's it, we're now logged into our Pi. I'm going to hold down the control key and press L to clear the screen. For security, let's change the default password. To do so, type PASSWD and press enter. Pop in the current password of lowercase raspberry, then enter your new password and type it again to confirm it. The next thing I want to do is find the Pi's MAC address. I can do this by typing IP space A, and here we can see it listed beneath WLAN 0, which is the wireless network adapter. Make a note of yours and then open the web browser. We're going to log back in to our router and find the section where we can reserve an IP address. If you've been watching this video from the beginning, you'll recall earlier that I already added my Tapo IP camera. So now let's add the Raspberry Pi. I'm going to give this an IP address of 192.168.0.100. Then I'm going to pop in the Pi's MAC address. I'll call it Pi and then click the Add button and OK it at the bottom. When you've added yours, you can log out of your router and let's return to the command prompt. For the change to take effect, I'm going to reboot my Pi, and we can do that by issuing the command sudo space reboot. Let's clear the screen while we wait for it to restart. Now that the Pi has a fixed IP address, let's log back in using that address. Mine is 192.168.0.100. Since we've changed the IP address, we need to type yes again to connect to it, and then enter your Pi's new password. Great, we're now ready to start configuring our Pi as an IP camera. I'm going to make sure that it's up to date by entering sudo apt update and then sudo apt upgrade. And yes, I do want to continue. Usually after a lengthy update I'd do a restart, but since the Pi will need one once we've enabled the camera interface in a moment, I'll leave that for now. Right, let's enable the camera. I'm going to type sudo space raspi-config. Use the cursor keys on your keyboard to highlight interface options and then press enter to select it. Press enter again on P1 camera and toggle over to select yes. With the camera enabled, we can hit OK. Press the tab key twice to highlight finish and then press enter to select it. And yes, we do want to restart now. Give your Pi a few moments to do so and then log back in. To turn our Pi into an IP camera, we need some software to convert the Pi camera's video feed into an RTSP output that we can bring into ZoneMinder. And the software in question is the excellent VLC media player. So let's install that using the following command. Press enter to run it. And then once again to install. To actually utilise VLC, we're going to write a short little script. If you've never done so before, don't worry, it's pretty straightforward, and I'll break it down as we go along. Make sure that you're in your Pi account's home directory by typing cd space tilde and pressing enter. Then we're going to use a text editor called Nano to create the script. We can do that by typing nano space and then the name that you want to give to your script. I'm going to call mine RTSP. Then finish with .sh because it's a shell script. Press enter to open it. Obviously it's empty at the moment as we haven't put anything in there yet. On the top line we're going to start by putting hash exclamation mark, or hash bang as this is typically known, /bin/bash. Then press enter. This simply tells the system to use the bash or born again shell command line interpreter to execute our script. It's this second and final line that actually carries out our instructions, and that is raspi-vid space -o space dash space -t space 0 space -w space 1280 space -h space 720 space -fps space 15 space -n space pipe space cvlc space -vvv space stream : followed by 3 // dev /stdin space dash dash SOUT space apostrophe hash RTP, an opening curly bracket, SDP equals RTSP colon colon 8081 / closing curly bracket apostrophe space colon DEMUX equals H264. And that's it. Let's use the cursor keys to scroll back to the beginning of the line and we can take a look at what's going on. Raspberry Vid is the command line tool for capturing video from the Raspberry Pi camera module. The -O specifies the output. This would usually be followed by a file name for the video you're capturing. However, that's not the case here as we only want to use the camera's live stream. So instead we send this to stdout. While I'm not going to do so, after inserting another space you could add either -HF or -VF or both to horizontally or vertically flip the video image if required. The -T sets the time out of the streaming. Setting this to 0 disables it, so that way it will stream indefinitely. Hopefully -W and -H are obvious. This is the width and height of the video stream. I've set this to 1280 by 720 or 720p. You can set these to the resolution you require. Likewise, -FPS or frames per second can be adjusted to your requirements. I've gone for 15. The -N option could potentially be a useful one. This turns off the video preview. If you had a monitor directly connected to your Raspberry Pi, deleting this would show the video stream on its display. The pipe symbol takes the output of the first command, in this case the video stream, and sends it into the second command, in this case VLC. CVLC is the command line version of VLC Media Player, and in this first part of its command it specifies where to get the video stream from, which in this case is stdin. This is possible because we earlier fed the stream to stdout. We then use sout to output the video in the real-time streaming protocol. Here I've specified the port number as 8081, but you could use a different port if you prefer. And then the demux part is basically using the H264 codec to carry out this conversion. The good news is you don't have to understand all this in order for it to work. So hold down the control key and press X to exit, then type Y and press enter to save it. If we type the ls or list command, you can see that we now have our script, but at the moment we wouldn't be able to run it as it doesn't have the execute permission. So to add that, type chmod space +x space rtsp.sh and then press enter. Now if we run the ls command again, you can see that our script has turned green. This means that it's now executable. Right, before we go any further, let's test to see if it works. I'm going to run the script by typing // and then the name of the script, which in my case is rtsp.sh, and then press enter. Don't worry about all the writing on the screen, it's perfectly normal. We're going to open VLC Media Player, then select Media and click on Open Network Stream. We're going to enter the address rtsp:// then enter the IP address of your Raspberry Pi, followed by a colon and the port number that you set for it, and pop a / on the end. Okay, the moment of truth. Let's hit play. Excellent, so we've got a picture of a garden. Let's close out of that. I'm going to click inside the command prompt window and press Ctrl+C to cancel the live stream. If it doesn't do it the first time, try again. Now that we know it's working, we can create a service to automatically start our script. We need to do this as you don't want to be logging into the Pi every time it boots to start it manually. We're going to use the Nano text editor again, but this time we'll open it with sudo as we need admin permissions to do this. You need to enter the path /etc/systemd/system/. In most modern Linux operating systems, systemd controls the processes that occur when the system boots up, so we're going to add our new service to this directory. You can call it what you like. For consistency, it might be a good idea to give it the same name as your script. For that reason, I'm going to call mine RTSP. But this time, instead of ending with .sh, we put .service on the end. and then press enter to open this new file in the text editor. In square brackets we start with the word unit with a capital U. If you press enter, inside this section we're going to add the word description followed by the equals sign. Then you can enter a short description of what we're trying to do. I'm going to put auto start RTSP stream. On the next line we need to put the word after followed by another equals. This tells the system that our service must be started after a certain state has been reached. I'm going to put multi-user.target. This means when all services are running at the command line interface. If you leave a one-line gap and then start the second section with the word service with a capital S, again in square brackets, we're going to set the type to simple. This is the default type, which means our service is to be started up immediately once the previous conditions have been met. On the next line put exec start with a capital E and a capital S, again followed by the equals sign. This is where we tell the service the path to our script, or in other words the script's location. This should be /home/pi, another / followed by the name of your script, which for me is rtsp.sh. On the next line we're going to put working directory, all one word with a capital W and a capital D, equals /home/pi. As the name suggests, this sets the working directory for any executed processes. And since our script is also located here, it makes sense to use our Pi account's home directory. On the next line, type restart with a capital R equals, then enter always. This means that if for any reason this service should stop, it will always try and restart itself. Then on the next line we're going to put user with a capital U equals pi. This is just telling the service our account's username. And that brings us to the third and final section of our service. So leave another one-line gap, and this time put the word install inside the square brackets with a capital I. Then on the final line enter wanted by, all one word with a capital W and a capital B, equals multi-user.target. And this line determines under what conditions the automatic start may happen. As was the case earlier, multi-user target means that all services must be running at the command line interface. Okay, let's save and exit our service. And we can do that by pressing Ctrl X, typing Y and pressing enter. All that's left to do now is to start and enable it. To start the service we need to type sudo space systemctl space start, then another space followed by the name that we gave to our service, which in my case was rtsp.service, and then press enter to start it. Now if you press the up arrow key once on your keyboard, that brings back the last command we entered, and if you use your cursor keys to move along the line and delete the R and T off the end of start and then enter TUS, we now have status. So entering this revised command will show us the current status of our service, and as you can see it's currently active and running. Press Q on your keyboard to quit out of there. So let's clear the screen, and now we're going to enable it so that it starts automatically whenever you turn on your Pi. So tap the up arrow again, and this time we're going to delete the word status and type in enable instead, then press enter to execute the command. And that's it, our Raspberry Pi is now good to go, and we can log out of it by typing exit. I'm going to close the command prompt and log back into ZoneMinder. From the main console I'm going to add a new camera and call this one Pi. The source type wants to be FFmpeg, and I'm going to set the camera's function to motion detect. Make sure that enabled is ticked. And as this camera's pointing at a picture of a garden, let's pretend it's outside and set reference image blend percentage to outdoor. With that done, let's head over to the source tab. We need to set the source path to the Raspberry Pi's RTSP address. So for me that's RTSP://192.168.0.100:8081/. We're going to change the method to UDP, and check that the target colour space is set to 32-bit colour. Next we're going to set the capture resolution. If you recall, I set the Pi's RTSP stream at 720p, so to save time I'm going to choose that from the drop down list as well. If you experience any problems you can always try lowering the resolution. Because we created this RTSP stream ourselves, we had the opportunity to set some of the orientation properties earlier on the Pi. If you chose not to do that and now find that you need to, you can set them here instead. We don't need to do anything on the other tabs, so let's click Save. Now let's click on the newly added camera to see what's happening. Lovely, now that we're seeing our impressive garden, let's create some movement to trigger an event. Yes, that's right, it's a gardener's worst nightmare. Right, if I scroll down I should now have an event. I've actually got 2 of them. So if I click on this one, the captured footage starts playing back automatically. We'll take a closer look at this playback or event window when we delve more deeply into ZoneMinder's web interface. But for now, let's exit out of there and return to the console. That's 3 cameras down, 1 to go. For the final camera we're going to take an old Android smartphone and recycle it as a network camera. To do this we'll need to install an app. But before we do that we're going to find the Android device's MAC address. This is because we may need it to reserve an IP for the smartphone. So here I am on the home screen. I'm going to open the app drawer and look in settings. Now you may need to have a look around to find it, because depending on the model and the version of Android it can be in different places. A couple of popular sections to try are in Wi-Fi and also in About Phone. It's this latter section where it's hiding on this device inside Status. And if I scroll down a fraction, there it is, the Wi-Fi MAC address. Okay, so make a note of yours and then you can come out of settings. And I'm going to head back over to my Windows 10 PC and log in to my router. Once again we need to reserve an IP address, this time for the Android smartphone. I'm going to go with 192.168.0.101. Some routers will automatically detect both the devices on your network and their MAC addresses, which makes it very easy to reserve an IP address. But if your router's a bit more basic like the one here, simply fill in the MAC address manually. And I'm going to call this one Android. Then add it and make sure it's saved. Once you've added yours you can log out of the router. And let's head back over to the smartphone. Before going any further it's a good idea to restart the phone so that it can pick up its new IP address. Once it's rebooted, if you want to check that it's got that new address you can head back into the settings. And on this phone I'll head back into About Phone and then Status. And as you can see there's the IP address that I set, so let's come out of there. Next we need to open the Play Store and search for IP Webcam and then install that. Once it's installed you can exit out of the Play Store. Hopefully you've got a shortcut on your home screen, if not check in the app drawer. You can leave these settings on the defaults unless of course there's something you'd specifically like to change. One section you may want to look at is local broadcasting. In here you have the option to set up a username and password if you want to. As it's inside our local network I'm just going to leave these blank. You also have the option to change the port number, which by default is 8080. Again I'm just going to stick with that, so let's back out of there. And then if I scroll to the bottom we want to start the server. We need to allow the app access to our files and also to the camera. And then lastly to the microphone. And then you should get an image. Here we're looking at a picture of a study. I'm going to pop the smartphone back on the desk as it's easier to operate. You can see at the bottom of the screen we've got 2 addresses. If you were to pop one of these into a web browser you get a settings screen for IP webcam. There's all sorts of settings you can configure in there. You can even view the camera's video feed through the web browser. But for our purposes you don't need to do any of this. Instead, if you select the More button and then choose RTSP H264 on VIF URLs, locate the RTSP addresses They both use H.264 video, but the top one uses ULAW audio, whereas the bottom one uses HQPCM. HQPCM should offer better sound quality, but as I'm not interested in audio, I'm going to make a note of the RTSP ULAW address, as this may use a little less bandwidth. I'm going to press the back button to come out of that, and let's return to our computer. Before we add our Android camera into ZoneMinder, let's first test that it works. I'm going to open VLC, click on Media and select Open Network Stream. Enter the RTSP address from the IP Webcam app. So this is basically RTSP:// the IP address of your Android smartphone, a colon and the port number that the IP Webcam app is broadcasting the video stream on, followed by a / and the type of video compression being used, then an underscore and the type of audio that you've chosen, and finishing with .stp. Right, let's click the play button. And there we have our office. Okay, let's come out of that. Now that we know it's working, let's return to the ZoneMinder console. And I'm going to add another new camera. I'll call this one Android. The source type wants to be on FFmpeg, and then select the function that you want. I'd usually choose motion detect, but for the sake of variety, let's go with record. Now remember, this option will continuously record, so it will seriously eat into your storage space. Make sure that enabled is ticked, and as this is an indoor camera, I'm going to leave reference image blend percentage on indoor. Now flick over to the source tab, and we need to enter the source path. So this is the RTSP address that we just tested in VLC a moment ago. We can leave the method on TCP and the target color space on 32-bit color. Set the capture resolution to what you require. Since the feed seemed fine in VLC, I'm going to go with 720p. I'm going to leave the orientation on normal, but set yours as required. The other tabs aren't really necessary. That said, if you're setting a camera to continuously record, you may wish to look in the miscellaneous section. In section length, you can specify how long each of the continuously captured events will be. With the settings configured, let's click on Save. Now let's check on our new camera. Just the job, and if we scroll down you can see that it's already capturing its first event. Let's come out of there. That's it, all 4 cameras are now added. If you want ZoneMinder to capture your camera's sound, and obviously providing your camera does actually have a microphone, you need to turn on the audio within the camera's settings in ZoneMinder. To do this, click on the Storage tab, and then set Video Writer to H.264 camera pass-through. You'll also most likely want to store the audio stream when saving an event, and then remember to save your settings. I've just triggered an event on that camera, so let's play it back and see if we have audio. Time for a cup of coffee in the kitchen. It's not going to be winning any sound awards, but I think you can call that a success. With everything up and running, let's take a look around the ZoneMinder interface. We already know that in the console section we can add new cameras. Obviously if you were to select one over on the far right hand side you could delete it as well. We also know that clicking on a camera will show us its live feed, and assuming that it's not just set to monitor, scrolling down the page will show us the most recent events that it's captured. As we've seen before, clicking on an event will open the event window and play back the captured footage. But what if you want to view an older event? For that we need to return to the main console. From here the number of events captured on each camera is listed in the events column. We could click on one of these to view all of the events captured by a particular camera, but perhaps more useful is the row at the bottom. This is the total number of events captured from all of the cameras. We can also see how much storage space they're taking up. Let's have a look at all of the events. By default they're listed by ID number with the oldest events at the top, but you can change the order by clicking on one of the column headers. For example, you could order them by length by clicking on duration. If we scroll to the bottom, you can see that already the events go on for several pages. By selecting an event, there's a number of things you can do with it, including the option to delete if your storage space is getting a bit full. If you were going to do this, you'd probably want to select multiple boxes to get rid of the oldest footage. I'll untick those and let's view an old event. As usual, the events window starts automatically playing back the recording. This particular captured footage was originally titled Event 15, but I've given it a slightly more meaningful name. You can easily do this by clicking in the box and changing the title to whatever you want, and then clicking the rename button. Before we go any further, the image is a bit large for the screen, so let's click this drop down box next to Scale and choose Scale to Fit. That's better. Now we can see that we've got playback controls along the bottom. From within this event window you can also delete or archive the footage. Next along you have the option to view the individual frames. This can be useful to see what actually triggered the recording. If you click on the thumbnail, it highlights the area of the image where motion was first detected. Next to frames we have stills. These are the individual images that make up the video. If you click on one, you can flick through them image by image. Let's close out of that and return to the video by clicking on Stream. The video button is possibly one of the most useful options. This allows you to download the captured footage. So first choose the video format that you'd like. I'm going to go with MOV. I'm going to keep the frame rate on real and the video size on actual, and then click Generate Video. When it's done that, we can click on Download. Depending on your web browser, you may then need to click Show All to choose what you want to do with that download. I'm going to click Save As and save it to my downloads directory. Then close the little video window and return to the event viewer. If I open File Explorer and the Downloads folder, there's the downloaded video. So this is now on my PC to do with what I want. Let's close out of there. If I close File Explorer and head back to the event window, there's also an export option. This will package up all of the files related to the captured event ready for you to export. I'm just going to close that. And that's basically the event window. Let's back out of there. At the moment these events are shown in list view, but we can switch this to a timeline. Then if you hover your mouse pointer over the timeline, you can see images of the captured events. Let's return to the list view. Okay, next up we've got options. So there's all sorts of things you can change in here, including the default language. Display may be useful if you prefer a darker theme. Storage will show you the path where the captured events are kept. And then depending on the size of your setup, in users you could add additional users to ZoneMinder. The log section is pretty self-explanatory. For larger installations, groups could be useful. Here you can create groups of specific cameras. So let's say I wanted one for indoor cameras. I'll give it the name Indoor. You can even have groups within groups, but as this is my only group, the parent group will be none. And then the important part is Monitor, where we choose our cameras. So in this indoor group I'm going to have Xbox, then Tapo, and finally Android, and I'll save that. Right, there's my group, and we'll see how this works shortly. Next along the top is filters. Here you could define some quite complex conditions by creating your own filters. If you click the drop down list next to use filter, there are a couple already built in. So if we have a look at one of these, we can see how they work. Purge when full keeps a check on your storage space, and when it reaches 95% full, it deletes the first 100 entries in ascending order, so in other words, the oldest first. Note, it only does this with unarchived events, so anything you archive will be kept safe. It also runs the filter in the background. Next along at the top we have Cycle. As the name suggests, Cycle will cycle through the video feeds from each of your connected cameras. By default it will go through all of them, but this is where groups can come in. By clicking here and selecting a group, it will now only cycle through cameras within that group, and you can turn that off just as easily. You can also filter the cycle of cameras by their function, so you could have it show only those that are set on motion detection. You could also display them by the camera's status, or even choose an individual camera. If for some reason you didn't want to see the video feeds, you can have it cycle through a still from each camera instead. Let's return to the live stream. Montage is perhaps one of the most useful views. In here you can view all of your cameras on a single page. Again, if you're using groups, you could choose just to display a particular group. I'll go back to all. Once more, you can filter the cameras by function or status, or even choose individual cameras. Let's return to all of them. You may wish to scale it down to fit them all on screen, or alternatively, if we set the scale to fit, we can choose the layout and have 4 wide. If you plan on using this layout a lot, it might be a good idea to save it, and we can do that by clicking on Edit Layout, then giving it a name. I'm just going to call it My Layout, and clicking Save. And now it's available straight away from the Layout drop-down list. One of the most powerful features in ZoneMinder, and the reason for the first part of its name, is zones, and we can see these by clicking on Show Zones. When you add a camera to ZoneMinder, a zone is created automatically. By default, this covers the entire area of the camera feed, as we can see here highlighted in red, but you actually have the option to customize this, and we'll look at how to do precisely that in the zones section of this video. But for now, let's hide the zones. Next on the top menu is Montage Review. This is a very resource intensive page, as it allows you to simultaneously view past events from different cameras. The History button will allow you to pick a specific date and time. You can choose the From and To by selecting each of these boxes, and then it's just a case of moving along the timeline to find what you're looking for. Clicking on Live will return you to the original screen. Audit Events Report is a power user feature that looks for recording gaps in events and recording issues in MP4 files. If you want to log out of ZoneMinder, click on your account name to reveal the log out option. And then if you ever need to restart ZoneMinder without restarting the computer, you can click on Running and change the state to Restart and then Apply. I'm going to close out of there. You can also set ZoneMinder's bandwidth. Unless you're having problems, I'd leave this on high. And there we have the ZoneMinder Web Interface. ZoneMinder has a neat feature known as zones. Once you've got your cameras up and running, you may want to configure this. To do so, pick the camera you want to change the zone on, so I'll do this on the Tapo. Click the number 1 in its zone column, and then click anywhere inside the video's feed. You can see at the minute that all of the video is highlighted in red. This means that everything is being monitored. In other words, any sign of motion in any part of the video feed will trigger ZoneMinder to capture it, assuming the camera is set to do so, of course. But let's say you don't want this. An example might be if you have a pet that walks around the floor. You don't want little Fido triggering the camera every time he wanders past. This is where zones come in. It's a little bit fiddly, but if you grab the handle at the corner of the screen, you can resize the red area. So let's do that at the bottom left as well, and drag that one up there. It's a bit rough and ready, but hopefully you get the idea. Now Fido can roam free beneath the monitored area, and only movement in the red zone should trigger an alarm. But first we need to scroll down to the settings below to activate this. You can give it another name if you like. I'm going to call it Fido. There's actually different parameters we can set known as types. The most common and default type is active. This means that it will trigger an alarm when motion is detected within the set zone. Rather than go through every option, I'll instead point you to the ZoneMinder documentation on defining zones, as some of them are quite complex and their use case will be fairly specific. So I'll just leave that on active. It's not required that you choose a preset, but these can be used to choose between speed versus accuracy. You can set up multiple zones within a single video feed, and if you are going to do this, you might want to set a different colour for each one. And unless you have a reason for changing them, it's probably best to leave the other settings alone. So I'm going to click on Save. And there we go, Fido is now active. If you need to add another zone, you can do so here, but I'm just going to close out of there. Now that we have ZoneMinder up and running on our home network, you may wish to access it remotely. To do this, I'm going to use Zero Tier. If you're not familiar with this software, it allows us to easily connect 2 or more devices securely over the internet as though they were on the same local network. I'm not going to go through all the steps of setting up ZeroTier as I've already done a video on this. You can find a link in the video description. Instead, I'll just cover adding our TurnKey Linux ZoneMinder appliance to ZeroTier. To get started, open your web browser and head to the TurnKey Linux ZoneMinder control panel. We're going to open the web shell and log in as root. Let's clear the screen. Now open a new tab and type in zerotier.com. If you don't already have an account, you'll need to sign up for a free one, but since I've already done that, I'm just going to download the software. For our ZoneMinder appliance, we need the Linux version, and you need to copy the text underneath the GPG section. Once it's highlighted, you can right click on it and choose copy. Close ZeroTier's tab, then right click inside ZoneMinder's web shell and choose paste from browser. From there, right click inside the box and select paste and then click on OK. We need to use the cursor keys to move along the line and delete sudo. This isn't needed because we're already logged in as root. So this command is first going to use GPG to check that the ZeroTier software is genuine and then install it for us. Let's press enter to do just that. Splendid, so that's completed successfully. Make a note of your ZeroTier address as you'll want to authenticate this before you add it to your ZeroTier network. And with that done, I'm going to clear the screen. Assuming you've already set up your ZeroTier network, the next step would be to join this computer to it. And we can do that by entering ZeroTier-CLI space join space and then your ZeroTier network ID. Press enter to execute the command. So you can see that it's joined OK. The next step is to authenticate this computer on your ZeroTier network, which I'll do off camera. And then if you give it a minute and run the command ZeroTier-CLI space list networks. And you can see that this is now joined to my ZeroTier Byte My Pi network, and it has the ZeroTier network IP address 10.147.18.200. So I'm going to log out of there and move over to another device with ZeroTier installed. Here I am on Android, and if I open the web browser and type in ZoneMinder's ZeroTier IP address, you can see that we now have access to it from anywhere with an internet connection. Remember, ZoneMinder is using a self-signed certificate, so you'll need to proceed past the warning message. I wouldn't normally advise using self-signed certificates over the internet, but so long as you're only connecting through your ZeroTier virtual network, you should be fine. Next, we're going to set up email notifications. This is for anyone who would like to receive an email when one or more of their ZoneMinder cameras detects motion. So let's get started. Navigate to the TurnKey ZoneMinder control panel and open the web shell. Then log in as root. To get this up and running, we need to install a couple of packages, but first let's make sure that these will be up to date. Okay, the first one is called Mail Utils, so let's grab that. This software is described as a Swiss Army knife of electronic mail handling. And then we need a package called SMTP. This is a simple mail transfer protocol client, and SMTP is the system that enables emails to be sent. Now that they're installed, the last thing we need to do in the web shell is find the location of the MSMTP program, and we can do that by typing where is, all one word, space MSMTP, and we just need to make a note of this first location. With that done, let's log out. Next, you need to log into ZoneMinder. So enter your credentials and click Login. Head to the top menu and select Options. Then in the sidebar menu, click Email. We need to tick Opt Email as we're going to set up a filter shortly. Then enter the email address where you want your ZoneMinder notifications to go to. You can enter an email subject or leave it on the default. Likewise, you can customize the email message or leave it as is. If we scroll down the page, we need to tick the New Mail Modules box. Leave the email host on localhost and then enter a from email. I'm going to use root@localhost. If you want to enter a URL, you can do so here. Filling in this box would create a link in the email to your ZoneMinder installation. So if you've set up remote access, you could enter ZoneMinder's zero-tier IP address here. Below this we need to tick the SSMTP mail checkbox, and then in the SSMTP path we need to enter the location of the MSMTP program we made a note of a minute ago. Right, with all that done, let's click on Save. Next we need to return to the console. Each camera has a monitor ID, and you can find this by hovering over them. So my Xbox camera is 1, Tapo is 2, Pi is 5, and Android is 9. Make a note of yours. From here we're going to head into Filters. By adding a filter, we're setting up the criteria as to when we'll receive an email notification. I'm going to start by giving it the name Camera Alarm, and then I'm going to click the first drop down box and select Monitor ID. Next we need to choose a condition. Let's say we want to receive a notification when any of the cameras detects movement. If you were to set this to greater than and then enter a 0 in the box, providing all of your cameras have a monitor ID greater than 0, this condition will be met. Alternatively, and what I'm going to do here, is set it to email me when motion is detected on a single camera. For this to work, I'm going to change greater than to equal to, and then I'm going to change 0 to 2, which is the monitor ID of my TP-Link Tapo camera. We need to add a second line by clicking the plus symbol. Leave the first box on and. That's because we only want to receive a notification when the conditions from both this first line and the second line we're about to add are met. Make sure that alarm frames is selected and change equal to greater than. Then enter the number 10. You may need to play around with this setting. If the number's too low you could get emails every few seconds, but too high and you may never receive one at all. So for the camera alarm filter to activate, more than 10 alarm frames need to be triggered, and in this case they must be on the camera with monitor ID 2. You can choose how you want your matches to be sorted. I'm going to leave it on ID ascending, and I'm going to limit it to the first one result as I don't want loads of entries in the email notification. Obviously choose whatever works best for you. In order for this filter to work, we need to tick email details of all matches, and I'd also recommend ticking run filter in background. Okay, let's save the filter. And you can see that it's added it to the list of filters. If you don't want a particular filter anymore, once selected you can delete it, but I don't want to do that because instead it's time to test it. That seems to have done the trick. Here's the email I received notifying me of the detected movement. You can see that, among other things, it lists the camera, the event ID, and the duration of the captured event. It also lists the filter that triggered the notification. And that's how we get ZoneMinder to alert us by email. We now come to the area that nobody likes doing but everybody ought to do. I'm talking about backups. Having just spent the time configuring and setting up ZoneMinder, you probably don't want to have to go through that all again should the worst happen. That's why, even if you only ever run one, you should create a backup after setting up your system. TurnKey Linux has a built-in system known as TKLBAM, or TurnKey Linux Backup and Migration. By default, once configured, this is designed to be an automated process. That's great if you don't mind backing up to the cloud and potentially incurring a charge. Feel free to use this, but for those who want a little more control over their data, I'm going to show you how to perform a local backup, which although a more manual process, at least is completely free. To get started, we need to open a web browser and head over to hub.turnkeylinux.org. Although we'll be performing a local backup, we still need to create a free TurnKey Hub account in order to activate the backup system. So assuming you don't already have one, click the sign up button to get started. After doing so, unless you wish to continue and go the automated Amazon route, delete the last part of the web address and change it to profile. All we need from here is the API key, so click on show to reveal it. I'm going to highlight it and copy to the clipboard. Once you've done that, you can log out of the TurnKey Linux Hub and then go to the TurnKey ZoneMinder control panel, and from there log into the web shell as root. You can see that it tells us that the backup and migration is not initialized, and that to initialize it we need to run this command to link the system to our TurnKey hub account. So let's do that now. Enter TKL-BAM-INIT and press enter. Right click and choose paste from browser. Right click again inside the box and select paste, and then click on OK. And it's now linked the TurnKey Linux installation to the hub account. Don't worry if it's reporting a problem. I believe this is because it's not linked to an Amazon S3 account. The important part is that it's downloaded the TurnKey ZoneMinder profile, and that should enable us to run our backup. OK, let's clear the screen and do just that. I'm first going to double check the current directory, and that can be done by typing pwd and pressing enter. /root is exactly where I want to be. If this wasn't the case, I could type cd space tilde and press enter to get there. You need to issue two commands when running a backup. The first one is tkl-bam-backup, then a space, double dash, address, space, file, double /, and then the location where you want to put the actual backup. So I'm going with /root, then /tkl/backup. This will get the command to create the TKL or TurnKey Linux folder and the subfolder backup within the root account's home directory. Pressing enter will start creating the backup. This process uses the duplicity backup software and backs up everything from captured events to ZoneMinder's configuration, including the database that runs behind the scenes. So make sure your ZoneMinder computer has plenty of free storage space before you run it. Now that the backup is completed, we can use the ls command to view the TKL folder that has been created. However, the backup on its own is no use, and that's where the second command comes in. For this, you need to type tkl-bam-escrow space, and then the location where you want to store this file. I'm going to put it in the root directory again, and in the new TKL folder, and then give this file the name key. That's because running this command will create a key file that's required in order to restore the backup. For security, it will create a passphrase, so type in what you want this to be, and then confirm it. OK, if we use the cd or change directory command to go into the new TKL folder, and then list the contents, you can see that we've got both the backup and key all inside that folder. That's all well and good, but for obvious reasons it's not advisable to keep backups on the same machine you've backed up. So how do we put it somewhere else, you may be wondering? Well, let's log out of there and we'll take a look. I'm going to download a program called FileZilla. It's at the filezilla-project.org website, and we want the client, not the server. I'm going to get the Windows version, obviously get the one for your operating system, and I want the standard edition, not the Pro. Let's save that to my downloads directory, and then go and find it. FileZilla is what's known as an FTP or File Transfer Protocol program. There are plenty of other FTP applications around, but this is certainly one of the most popular, being both free and open source and cross-platform as well. The reason we only need the client is that TurnKey Linux has already set up the server for us, and we're going to connect to that. Once it's installed, we can click on Finish to launch the program. OK, you want to type the IP address of your ZoneMinder appliance into the host box, pop in the username of root, and then the password of your root account. The port number is 22, and then click Quick Connect. And I'm always going to trust this host. So the remote site, which is our ZoneMinder appliance, has opened in the root account's home directory for us. And if I click on the little plus sign to expand it, there's the TKL folder that we need. On the computer that you're sitting in front of, which is known as the local site, you just need to decide where you're going to put it. I'm going to go for the downloads directory. And then it's just a case of dragging the TKL folder and dropping it where you want it. Obviously, the longer your ZoneMinder instance has been running, the larger your backup will be and the longer this will take. Being such a manual process, I see this more as a disaster recovery solution rather than a regular backup routine. That said, tasks can be automated, but doing so goes beyond the scope of this video. Once you've got your backup safely stored somewhere else, I'd right click on the TKL folder within ZoneMinder and delete it to free up some space. Just in case that awful day where for whatever reason ZoneMinder stops working ever arises, let's quickly run through the restore procedure. To save time, I've already done a fresh install of TurnKey Linux's ZoneMinder appliance and given it a static IP address. Although I've done this on the same computer, if the machine had died this could be on a brand new system. Next, open FileZilla on a computer that has access to your backup and pop in your credentials to connect to the ZoneMinder appliance. If it's the same computer you used FileZilla on before, it'll probably complain about a potential security breach. This is because, being a new installation of ZoneMinder, its security fingerprint has changed. In this situation it's perfectly fine and you can trust the new key. In the local site, locate the TKL folder. Then drag and drop that into your ZoneMinder appliance root accounts home folder. Once the transfer is complete, close FileZilla and then make your way to the TurnKey ZoneMinder control panel. If I log in to ZoneMinder, you can see it's a fresh install because I haven't even chosen whether to send data to ZoneMinder or not. So let's return to the control panel and log in as root to the web shell. From there I'm going to clear the screen and check with the ls command that I can see my TKL folder. Right, so everything's in place to restore the backup, and we can do that with the following command: tkl bam-restore space --address space file : then the location of the backup folder, which if you did the same as me is /root/tkl/backup. Then another space --key file equals and the path to the key file, which again if you've used the same as me is /root/tkl/key, and then press enter. Once that's completed, I'd recommend removing the backup directory to save some space, and we can do that with rm space -rf space and the name of the backup directory. We can check it's gone by entering ls, and then as the prompt suggests, let's do a reboot. Give it a minute to start back up and then log in to ZoneMinder, and straight away you can see that all the cameras are there and it even has some events. All the cameras are green, which is always a good sign. Let's take a peek at one of them. Yes, that looks fine, so let's come out of there. The events are rising, so that's looking good as well. And it's even restored my kitchen video. What more could you ask for? As far as I can tell, the only thing missing is 0 tier, so if you're using this for remote access you'll need to reinstall it. And there you have it, a freshly restored ZoneMinder. That brings us to the end of this video. Hopefully you're already planning how to use ZoneMinder's versatility to create a security system that works for you. And thanks to TurnKey Linux it's never been easier to get started. So whether you want to protect your home, or just keep an eye on next door's cat leaving your little presents in the garden, ZoneMinder should fit the bill. As always, if you enjoyed this video please like and subscribe, and if you'd like to be notified when I post the next one, just click the bell icon. Thanks for watching, and until next time, take care.